Hello my loves, continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story, what the hell happened? I hate him and everything about him. My day is instantly ruined when I remember that he's still alive. He failed as a father to all 3 of his kids, and he can't accept that fact because he's so fucking proud and arrogant. So, he takes out his anger on us and hits us like it's going to fix a damn thing. All this money and respect he's boasting about having is going to mean nothing when he's dead, which is soon, hopefully. He thinks what he's doing is correcting me or disciplining me, but he's only creating an enemy out of his own fucking daughter. And that's embarrassing. He's so used to everyone around him following him like fucking dogs that he can't stand it when there is someone who does not need him at all. He fucked up with my older sister, so they don't speak now. He's fucking up with my older brother and doesn't allow my brother to pick my side because he's so fucking insecure about someone being sick of his shit. But my brother will eventually get older, he will no longer need to follow his commands, and he will get married, have kids, and will cut contact. Guess who's gonna be left to turn to? That's right. Me. It's all tracing back to me, but he thinks I'm just a stupid child who has no idea what the fuck I'm doing and will eventually crawl back. I've crawled back long enough. I've tolerated his bullshit for so long, but this is the fucking last straw. I will grow up to be better than him, I will study harder, top classes, get an elite job, all in the name of shaming him. I will embarrass him so badly. His own daughter growing up to be a better person than he ever was and ever will be. He simply cannot stand the fact that the world does not revolve around him and that nobody is going to live to his point of view. He didn't make me, he's not the leader of anyone, he's not the president. Even the president doesn't get people to follow his point of view. Laws exist, but so do criminals. My point is, he's not important. Whether he likes it or not, he's just another hunk and waste of skin and bones, a useless piece of God's energy and time. I will sculpt the best life possible, just to make him eat his disgusting words. I'm planning to cut him off once I head off to college in a different country. I won't even tell him I'm going. I will make sure nobody tells him I'm going. I don't want him at any of my graduations, birthdays, wedding. Fuck, I don't even want him at my funeral if I were to die before him. I'm using my whole life as a vengeance plan, to fucking destroy him. Karma is real, and it is coming in the form of his own daughter. Story, The Secrets of Royal Children's Haven. Hi everybody, I'm 30 years old now, my income is about 3x/month. Currently, I am increasingly stuck in my relationship with my biological mother. Is there anyone here in the same situation who can share? Ever since I graduated from school and started working, my mother always compared me with children A, B, C, X, Y, Z. One day I asked him why he didn't work in construction. One day he did IT, another day he did architecture, one day his brother and sister worked in MMO and just bought a house. The salary was very high. One day his friend who worked at VCB got money from the copper sewing fund. Serve up to 5 million, why don't you work in a bank? Every time I hear where A, B, C earns 15 to 20 million, they come back and show off. I'm bored so I never share about my work and salary. The conversation between mother and daughter is always only a few sentences, and always revolves around salary and income. I have never seen her ask how the job was, if she liked the job, if there were any difficulties, or any words of support. In 2018, my best friend came to wish me a happy new year, and she also asked her friend to advise me on changing careers. After a while, I went to Hanoi to work. During pandemic 2020, The company allowed WFH for about 2 weeks. I went home for a while. During these 2 weeks everything was okay. On the last day I planned to withdraw money and give it to her as food and living expenses for those 2 weeks before going to Hanoi. But things didn't go as planned. As soon as I finished lunch and went up to the room to rest, my grandmother rushed into the room and scolded me, saying that I was too old to think. How many days had I lived without being able to give any money, and that I had no responsibility towards the family? He even pulled out a notebook and said he had recorded all the money I had given her so far, then threw it in my face and told me to look at it. I'm bored and don't want to say anything again. Wait until you're done talking, withdraw money, give it, then book a car to go to Hanoi. 2. I've only been married for 2 years. Recently, I had a small child for a few months, so I couldn't go back to my paternal hometown, district in Bac Giang, to visit my uncle and aunt before Tet. After Tet, I came home to play until the 4th, then booked a car to go to my wife's hometown, also Bac Giang, but it's a city, not convenient to go through the countryside, before going to Hanoi. During Tet, cars are expensive and there are a lot of trips, so the couple booked a shared car. As soon as I got in the car and was about to leave, my grandmother knocked on the door and told me to go to my grandfather's hometown to celebrate the New Year. At that time, I didn't have time to do anything else, and the road was inconvenient, so I told her to go to this car to drop off a fixed passenger. She couldn't go like that. Thinking everything was over, the other day she went to Hanoi to visit. After talking for a while, she told her family that they don't have money to go anywhere. I was so upset that after talking for a while, she said that even when I go back to my hometown, I don't have money to book a car. If I have money, I'll book the whole car and go wherever I want, and I'll turn wherever I turn. Everyone knows that the bus only runs on fixed routes. Even if you book the bus, it won't wait for you because in that time it can run 1 to 2 more trips. Not to mention the price on Tet holidays will be 1.5 equals x.2 on weekdays. I was so shocked that I couldn't stand it, so when I argued, I brought up the story that A, B, and C had just been working for a few years and bought a house. It's so boring that I don't even bother to say it again. Houses in Hanoi are about 3 million VND/unit. If you work for 5 years and are able to buy a house on your own, that's also an excellent form of society. I know that you'll go somewhere else and then come back and say it again, but it's okay. I'm bored and don't want to argue anymore because it won't get me anywhere. Before getting married, my wife worked very hard. Due to the nature of her job, she worked 6 days a week, working from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. continuously for 3 years, so before getting married, she quit her job to refresh for a few months. Then when I went back to work, I was still pregnant, so work was not the same as before. This is almost the end of 6 months of maternity leave, but because the baby was born prematurely, the two planned to let their wives take more time off and find a temporary job to work at home to take care of the baby, partly because they don't want her to come down and take care of them. It's less work, but it's extremely difficult. Headache. She knew that, so she constantly pressured her to go work for the company. In her eyes, her wife stayed home all day off and was a freeloader, refusing to go to work. To explain, the reason was that in the neighborhood, yes, in the neighborhood, there was a child A who had been on maternity leave for 2 months and left her child at home with her grandparents to look after her so she could go to work. I'm sure this case is only a minority, and for many reasons, not many mothers would feel secure in doing so. She also gave herself the example that in the past, she gave away her baby at 3 months, but today, there are no kindergartens that accept 3-month-old babies. She also talked to her wife in private many times, at the peak of which she told her that if she didn't go to work, you'd starve to death, while our family was fully able to pay for living expenses. Buying a house is determined by circumstances and will take a long time, but as long as you can't buy a house, it will probably be talked about for a long time. In fact, this National Assembly relationship is becoming more and more deadlocked day by day. I know that for many reasons, partly because of the characteristics of her previous job, partly because of her high expectations for her children, she is like that. But her constant comparison and blind pressure without a specific solution makes me more and more stressed and tired. Many times I want to give up, just stay in Hanoi and then go back to my hometown to play for Tet. But thinking back, I was the only child and my father passed away early, so I couldn't do that. Story: an incomplete portrait of a girl who died. You were never technically given a curfew. You always hated leaving the house, and your mom said this is why you instead had outside hours. So, at 16, when you come home at 3 in the morning, you're surprised to see light pouring out upstairs from the kitchen. A sign she's waiting up. You told her you were going to a bonfire and you likely wouldn't be back until after 2 because your friend would need to sober up to drive you home. Normally this would have placated your mom, but there she is, waiting for you. You suddenly feel elated, and this time it's not just because you're high. You're actually eager for a conversation with your mom, even if she's clearly gearing up to lecture you. You walk upstairs to the kitchen. She's at the table, eyeing you warily. A robe thrown over her pajamas, and her curls spilling messily over her shoulders. Her hair is rarely unstraightened, and you feel closer to her when she leaves it be. So? She asks while you get a glass of water. What? She shakes her head at you and pulls a sour face as if you should know what she means. Did you get my text? Your heart rolls roaring thunder. Every fight mom picks is to the death. It's exhilarating. You never know what's going to be pulled out of you, or what you're going to get from her. Sometimes it's even a little funny, but only to the two of you. You pad your hoodie down. It's winter and you probably need a real coat, but you haven't earned enough from babysitting to buy one yet. Your phone is an ice block in your pocket and you're completely unsurprised that it's dead. Sorry, you shrug at her, phone died. She pouts, and you're confused. She sighs and tightens her robe as you deflate. I asked you to get me Oreos and Pepsi. I was really looking forward to it. She doesn't have anything else to say to you. She goes down to the garage for a smoke. You think about joining her, but you have this aching pit in your stomach. At 12 you are a rabbit, caught in a trap waiting for the hunter to break your neck. Your eyes are wild. Your eyes are dead. Your grandfather's heart underneath you is almost as frantic as your own. His head turned towards the television. You look at your grandmother lying next to him, and she looks right back at you. Her mouth is a tight line and her eyes are wet. You try to press your thoughts, mostly pleas to get you out of here, into her head. Herman. Your grandmother says with her voice soft and her eyes wandering to his hand at the small of your back. It's time for bed. The next morning he teaches you to shoot. You are surprised by the feel of the gun. Warm as a baby bird and heavy as a stone. It strains your arms and you can't escape the thought that this was made to kill someone. You think of how a bullet rips through flesh when you're eyeing the paper target. You don't want to be here or do this, but what you want hardly matters. When you pull the trigger, the gun kicks back, the sound snaps your ears, your heart beats its fists against your chest, and you miss the fucking shot. You cry. Grandfather says you are weak. You try to breathe, even out, but your eyes wander to the treeline and you cry so hard your throat is raw. You are 5 and your great cousin Michael wraps duct tape around your wrists. He is quiet, intense, and almost reverent in his task. His pale cheeks flushed, watery blue eyes screwed in concentration, and the white blonde hairs on his arms stand up. It's the first time in a couple days you've had someone this focused on you. You watch the motions when you can no longer look at his face. The few glimpses you got were so different from how he usually is. Gone the impish mask of childhood and fixed the stare of a man attempting to break through a 10-year-old. You and he are one in the same. Cycling through your ages the way other children cycle through their moods. You don't say anything, and neither does your great aunt when she opens the car door with a bag of dog food balanced on her hip. You lose most of the summer you're 16 to a friend's bedroom. You and your mom have been fighting, but this has been true for years. You don't even remember why you don't get along, but she always insists you started it. Things that don't change don't matter. Nothing feels like it matters because time doesn't exist in this bedroom. The walls are plain white, the one window is covered up, and you and your friend never sleep when you're supposed to. The two of you alternate between writing, reading, watching movies, and in many ways this is the safest you've felt in years. But there is an edge to this comfort. You had left to stay the night, just one night, last month. You don't particularly enjoy leaving home because you never know when you'll be allowed back. Every time you ask you get the same answers. Let me enjoy my free time. I'm not ready to be a mom again. Just wait until Jonah leaves for the slope, then you can come back. You have not asked to go home in a week. You will not be asking any time soon. You don't usually have anything to say when you're told no anyways. Your friend's mom does eventually, after 2 months, grow tired of being expected to raise someone else's kid. Your mom still doesn't pick you up. Instead she sends Jonah. Jonah is her husband and you have never seen him sober. He is drinking a beer when he pulls into your friend's driveway. You don't want to get in the car with him, but you know you have no other choice. Your mom was pretty clear that if you don't get in the car with him you'll have to figure out your own place to sleep or ride home. It feels like a test. Jonah decides to spend the car ride drinking and talking about how much your mom loves you and your younger sibling. Every adult in your life feels the need to remind you of this, and it gets less convincing every time. Jonah doesn't even seem to believe it himself because he suddenly lurches into a new conversation about parents, and disappointment, and how in the end we fall into certain patterns. For him it was consuming anything in sight that could take him out of his head. He tells you he doesn't want you to go there. Your stomach aches thinking about the things you've already done. You wonder which part of the car you'll be sitting in at his age. 9-year-olds are not supposed to want to die. You know this because your mom told you that was the age when she first had suicidal thoughts. You know this because now you are 9 and you fantasize about death almost every day. You were told by the school to see a therapist even though you never admitted your thoughts to anyone. Your mom doesn't like your therapist. Your mom says she is delusional and focuses too much on your mom and not enough on the absence of your biological father. After every session your mom rants on and on about how this woman can't know you, doesn't have the facilities to help you, and will make you worse than you already are. Privately you think that you enjoy seeing your therapist because every time you see her there is 1 hour of your day just about you. You only get it once a week and for a while you enjoy it. But when you start to feel close to her something strange happens. She sees you off like she always does and your stomach drops. Your brain forces a horrifying thought. That this is all a ruse, an excuse to touch you, and as you turn away in shame you simultaneously cycle through images of her touching you. You ask your mom to stop seeing your therapist. Every reason you give is something your mom said. She is so triumphant it makes your throat tight. You can't remember anyone else touching you before, but you are so certain it will happen again. 16 is the first time you get drunk. You are stranded in your friend's room and still about a month away from going home. You're not worried about being drunk around your friend. You are worried about your thoughts. Vaults in your mind groan against the memories locked away in them. They feel ancient and forbidden, yawning and exhausted from the effort of withholding. You can pick apart different sections of your early childhood memories. Things that had not been accessible to you at home, where you are always worried or angry or hurt. None of them make sense. Each of them is behind a camcorder lens that makes them feel unreal. You remember watching Power Rangers after daycare at a friend's house. The bonfire your great aunt made to melt all of your cousin's treasures that were too similar to witchcraft. Cheyenne. Herman. Michael. It takes so many sips before you feel drunk. Before those memories slip into the tightly locked vaults you keep in your head. There is no freedom, but there is some strange emptiness, and that alone brings you so much relief. I don't like being alone with him. You say at 5 years old one night over the fire, while your mom and your great aunt and uncle balance stemless wine glasses on the arms of their camping chairs. You are of course talking about your grandfather, who is not really your grandfather. It's the touching, right? Asks your cousin, Michael, the blonde one. His expression urges you to continue. Every adult circled around the fire goes still except your mom. Your great-uncle, your great-aunt, and your uncle's faces harden under the warm glow. The only one here with any blood relation to you is your mother, and on some level you're aware that she sets the tone for how they all respond to you. The sun hovers over you, and your other brunette cousin pokes at the fire with sharp sticks. The lake shimmers in the distance and the trees whistle in the wind. Your blonde cousin stares at you from over the fire. He is thinner, paler, perceived more feminine than the other, and his watery blue eyes twinkle with a recognition that makes you uncomfortable. Yeah. You admit softly, and your entire body tenses when your mom's cackle echoes off the trees. She stares right at you. Her face twists between agony and joy and anger. Her cheeks in the full blush of booze and her eyes alight with a mischief that almost seems innocent. In these moments she's much more child than mother, and you know without knowing that she's not seeing you. Well, Herman does like M. Young. Cheyenne, your great-aunt's face is strained and her voice is soft. It's true. Your mom spins and rounds to your uncle. He loses interest when they hit puberty. She says something else, and no matter when you try to recount it, the moment is lost. Your great-aunt tries to shush your mom and your uncle walks away without saying a word. Your mom needs to be consoled, and if you speak now you're just taking another thing away from her. In between your great-aunt and uncle's home and your grandparents' home is a stretch of woods. They made a path illuminated by Christmas lights. At night you dream of this stretch. The branches reach out and whip across your face, the roots come up and trip you as you try to make your escape, and every time you try to get up the world spins and spins and spins until you fall back down. You hear beasts growling in the woods and you feel teeth close around your ankles and you try to scream but nothing comes out. You have this dream until you're 27 years old. Story: I was right about my stepdad. My mom got married to this guy after only knowing him in person for one day before getting engaged. I had a really difficult time with this guy because he was constantly making sexual innuendos to me about my mom and in general, behind her back. He played cruel mental games with me and my siblings. He was physically abusive as well, mostly to my youngest brother. But to my mom and the people in his circle, he displayed himself as an aging bachelor who always wanted a family. Everyone saw him as this kind, family-oriented, would do anything for ya kind of guy. He controlled this narrative that I was a messed-up kid who was into boys, alcohol, and drugs. I barely experimented at 13, so minuscule it was laughable, so he had to keep a tight leash on me. I would try and tell my mom about how cringe he was, and she would always blow me off. After an especially brutal incident with my little brother, I reported it to a teacher at my school. Because of his good old boy reputation, and how he represented me as a troubled teen trying to cause drama, no one did anything about it, and he actually threatened to kill me if I opened my mouth again. The happiest day of my life is when he requested to be transferred out of the country to make more money. He eventually divorced my mom, but before he did we had found this really explicit letter that a woman had written to him about how much she loved him raping her and how all she wanted in life was to be his sex slave. She went on and on about all the rough things she wanted him to do to her, and how often she thought of all the wild sex they had many years prior. She said she loved him and wanted to leave her husband to be with him, even knowing that he was married. My mom just gave me the rest of the letters she found over 25 years ago, and it was revealed that all of the letter writers talk about the wild sex that they had was when she was a young teen at summer camp, and he was her camp counselor. He was having rough, wild sex with a young teenage girl at summer camp when he was an adult. It makes me sick to my stomach to know that this is who I had been exposed to as a young girl at the time myself. My mom barely knew him and left me to live with him by myself for months. This also supported a suspicion I had that he had a sexual relationship with a girl I went to high school with, while we were 15 at the time. I didn't have proof, but I remember he had a secret meeting with her parents and all of a sudden she wasn't at school anymore. After he divorced my mom, she had found a pay stub showing he was paying child support for a kid we had no idea about. Long story short, this guy always gave me the ick. I was always uncomfortable around him and pleaded with my mom to see how sick he was, but no one would believe me. I was right all along. I went down a rabbit hole today trying to see if he ended up with the summer camper turned erotica/SM writer. She actually ran for a political position a few years after the letters were written. She has no idea where those letters are now. She has very specific handwriting. I would never publish these and expose her, but I can't help but think about how she has no idea of where these sensitive letters are. Story: I'm fine with my mom cheating on my dad, and even encouraged her to live with his new man. It's been 5 months since I set my foot on the US, and every day is a living hell to me. I have never really wanted to settle and study here, but now it is like I was forced to live like this for possibly years before becoming on my own. It's not America per se that is the problem, but the circumstance under which I got here. TLDR at the end of this TED Talk. To start with, my family really wanted us to study abroad and hopefully move to the US as I grow up, considering my other relatives already living there. TBH, I had no interest in going to the US to seek opportunity, and I surmised life would be depressing to me, at least. So I continued minding my own business in high school, making friends, getting grades, dating. In 10th grade, the concern of studying abroad rose to me, but I was too skeptical to think about it. I even thought my family intended to have me complete high school before moving, so I shook it off. Then in 11th grade, my parents paid for me to study SAT. Now I knew the matter was drawing closer to me day by day, so I started researching my own future plan before my parents take over. Little did I know, my parents sealed a deal with the language center to assist me with studying abroad. I tried to convince the center otherwise, but they already settled with my parents that the path to studying in the US was inevitable. I then tried to persuade my parents, but they ignored my request and they blamed on me for depending on others on your future career. I was speechless because my plan was screwed and I had to come to terms with the so-called American dream. At least they would give me a chance to graduate high school in Vietnam, right? Spoiler alert, well shit. So flash forward to summer 2023, as I finished 11th grade. I learned of a month-long vacation to the US. My parents told the purpose of the trip was to visit universities I and my sis will study in the future. Once again, I hoped this was just another post-COVID vacation and I could return home to continue 12th grade. Before leaving Vienna, I saw my GF for the last time and headed off. And here we are, the United States. We met the long-time no-see relative families and finally got into an empty flat. Why couldn't we stay in a hotel or something, but this very deserted flat in a strangely odd community? Yeah, it was at this moment that I knew my parents deceived me. I would be staying here for a while, studying right in the US, and having a new life. All my hope was gone. My heart shattered, but nobody seemed to bat an eye. My final high school year in Vietnam was gone, my loved ones were far away, and I couldn't even have a way back. I mean, my family had a well-planned trip around the US and go home, but it was just an excuse to go past immigration. When I confronted them, my parents said they needed to have a more relaxing life in the US. My sis was about to enter college soon, and I was forced to accept that life was better here. I hid my cries and felt blank, and next I had to confront my GF. People usually chastised early love, but I ignored what they said and let us glide over distance love. The following days, we went to the newcomer center, and boom, I was now a student of a local high school. All my effort in Vietnam turned to waste, and what worse, I was sorted to junior class aka 11th grade here. In other words, the road to independence was extended by a year unless I was an exorbitant child prodigy, but I was not. 5 months had passed, and I didn't make much true friends here. My contact in Vietnam was now only my GF, and we had frequent arguments, but in the end we deeply missed each other. I suffered from day-to-day depression, because I felt lonely. The other people in my family kept praising the US, but I felt sick of it because of absurd culture shock and I couldn't forgive them for deceiving me. Now my future plan was vague, and I had constant suicidal thought, but the worst part was I couldn't tell my parents how I felt. They just kept bringing up valid arguments to shut me up. I hated being forced to love American life. I know there are difficulties and setbacks in Vietnam, but I don't have the choice to choose my path. Money does not give happiness, and I'm afraid nobody's on my side. Anyways, what I want to do now is to just proceed on living like this for a while, then I could devise another plan and execute it right away. I want to escape the dependency on my family and live on my own by being the best I could be, whatever the career I choose. I would take my naivety as a lesson to be able to decide things on my own, but everything seems to be unstable for me right now. In the end, I miss my home country, my loved one, and I want to leave the US immediately. There's nothing in the US that would keep me back, even money. That's the story I want to tell today. Thanks for reading. Story: abusive parent, toxic family, and high expectation. Currently, I am a 21-year-old student. I had to think of a way to escape my father because the abuse had been going on for a long time and no one in my family knew about it. I decided to study abroad because I thought it was the only way to escape, even if only for a short time. This was a decision I regretted because I was struggling in the classes of a course I didn't like at all, archaeology, which is not popular in my country, and I had to convince my family to take it. Study abroad. My parents also expected me to be the best and smartest student in the class. Since I was little, they always wanted me to study well and be smart. If my scores were bad, they would repeat that over and over again, and even if I got good scores, they still saw that they weren't perfect. They compare me with my smart friends and say I'm lazy and useless. They also forced me to study what they wanted after class 10. When I finished my studies, they put me in an engineering field that I begged them not to choose. I failed my classes and kept it a secret until a professor told my dad everything. Things got worse and I had to beg them to let me study another major, and finally they agreed to let me study history. After a year I endured in engineering. My grades dropped dramatically in 10th grade, which is when I realized I was being abused by my father. I hate it, I feel disgusting. I had to pretend everything was fine at school and at home. No one knew. I didn't dare tell my friends because I was afraid they would consider me dirty. I couldn't sleep without locking the door because I was afraid he would do something. I always have to keep an eye on where he is, or I will lose control for fear of what he will do when no one is there. I try to stay near or around other family members. I'm very afraid of him. Even now, I still feel like he is watching me and sometimes touching me even though I am thousands of miles away from him, which makes me always in a state of tension and unable to concentrate, happy or even relaxing. All my favorite things like books, reading time, and car rides were ruined because he did something there, and I felt like all the things I loved were tainted. Plus, my father has an influential job, so I couldn't seek help legally or from any organization back home. My family also moved many times, so I always had difficulty making friends. I rarely talked to others. To add salt to the wound, they let my younger brother do whatever he wanted. He played cricket and was very serious about it. They let him choose easy subjects for higher classes and the course he wanted for college, while I had to give up badminton, which I had played for 7 years in 10th standard. Because I'm not good at studying. I don't hate my younger brother because that's when family feels like real family, when I can play with him, talk about things we like, and simply be brothers with fun games and competitions. Argued, while my dad was terrible and my mom criticized my grades and weight, calling me lazy all the time. In February 2023, near the end of the final semester of my undergraduate history major, there was talk about studying abroad, and I jumped at the opportunity because I felt it was the only way I could escape from my father. They paid for my tuition and accommodation in the new country. But I feel useless here because I don't know what to study. I felt useless and stupid among other students, and I felt very bad. I sought out a mental health counselor in college because psychotherapy became accessible for the first time. I still endure it because I have to call my parents every day. They make me feel guilty every time, saying they paid a lot of money, should study hard, get a job, and my mother talked about marrying someone and I should finish my master's program and PhD before age 25. I just want to drop out of college and run away sometimes. All I want is a simple job, not a high-end job like my parents want. All my life I wanted a small job, small things, and a simple life. I feel like I made the stupidest decision to come here because I didn't know how to study or even get a job. I only had 1 year in this country, and I was always afraid that I would be sent home. I was tired and afraid that my father would find out I was failing my classes again. I can't go to class and face students and professors. Even though I've been here for 4 months, I still haven't made any friends. I do not know what to do. I can't live alone, have no job, no money, and no visa to do it. I want to stay in this country and try to get by, but I have no way to do that. How can I get away from my parents and only keep in touch with my younger brother? I'm afraid that if they find out, they'll do something to me, or they'll kick me out on the street and talk bad about me with my younger brother and other family members and friends. I can't tell anyone, that's why I'm venting here. Story: I think my stepmom killed my dad, and it sickens me how relieved his death made me. My biological father and the woman I call stepmother, who will be called Kathy, must have seemed like a very happy couple. Kathy seemed to like my father very much, and they had similar views on most things. I cut off contact with my father when I turned 18, with only birthday messages filling the chat box. I wanted to reconnect someday, but after understanding how much pain he had caused my mother and me, after therapy opened my eyes, I felt wrong in forgiving him. To really understand my thinking, I have to tell you about my father. My father was not a good man during most of my childhood. He not only abused my mother and me, but also abused substances such as alcohol and drugs. Most of my mental disorders were the result of his heavy drug use while my mother was pregnant. All of my siblings suffered from the same disorder, which shows how long my father used these substances. This caused him to do a lot of things that he would later be angry about, the biggest of which was not trying to quit. His inaction to help with his addiction led my mother to file for divorce after becoming pregnant with my baby, and he only saw us supportively in the months that followed. I don't completely blame my father for how he became a member. My grandparents were immigrants from the boat with an extremely loose line when it came to discipline and abuse, which is my polite way of saying that mistreatment wasn't in their vocabulary. While my grandfather cherished me, he was an authoritative man with a heavy hand while my father was a child. My father was the best he could offer growing up. He was taught that physical action was discipline, and he used what he learned. We'll never erase the good things he did, or the happy times we shared. But I can still remember one night, crying when he hit my mother or me. Or the nights when my mother lay in bed with me, and I asked, "When is that monster leaving the house?" He didn't tell me when to come home because he worked away from home and would stay with his mother, my grandmother, on weekdays. I don't know if that's true, but I highly suspect that he also cheated multiple times on those nights that week. When my mother finally kissed my father, I felt like a chain was breaking. My mother was freed from his hands every time he drank alcohol or used drugs. My father did not accept kissing with the same level of optimism. My dad would bring the girls home, and every time my siblings and I saw him, he was on a date with someone else. Until one visit, it was still that girl. This is when Kathy appears. She was kind to me, but honestly, I attribute that to the fact that I can actually take care of myself when the kids need help with eating, bathing, and dressing. She also didn't have a daughter of her own, so she showed me a lot of things that my overprotective mother didn't, little things like how to horn and how to hold a gun. I think I quit because of Kathy, after realizing he didn't want to ruin 2 marriages. He was different than before I cut off contact. I can remember exactly how I received the information. I was at the mall and talking to a high school friend I hadn't seen in years. My mother texted me to come home, it was very important. I said goodbye to my friend before going home and found my mom out in the backyard with my aunt and uncle, who was my dad's friend before he started using drugs. And it was there that my mother told me that my father must die of a rare genetic disease, information that I still do not fully know, although it is very important information. Kathy talked to my grandmother, and the news spread through the family. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why do you think your stepmother killed your father? Reader, it is because the circumstances of his death were so surprising. Peace of mind. Just a few hours ago, my dad posted on his social media about the election and other things. The next day, he died from a genetic disease that I, having lived for over 20 years of my life, knew he had. That no one seems to know he has that disease? Furthermore, Kathy did not have a post-mortem experience and cremated him right at the hospital. She didn't tell us anything about how, when, where, or why he died, no name of the hospital, no doctor, no funeral or visitation, nothing. The feeling of relaxation when he passed away makes me feel guilty to this day. My father had a habit of lying to me and my family, and the fact that he could no longer act condescendingly towards us made me a little happy. I said I care about inheritance. My father has a habit: take out all my savings if you need money. At that time I didn't want money, I just felt at peace because I wasn't afraid of him coming back to deceive my family again. But part of me wonders if the data here is a genetic disease. I wouldn't be surprised if my father started using again and drained the account, just like he did during his days with my mother. Perhaps Kathy had fallen victim to my father as my mother had, and was simply angry. But, as unlikely as that may seem, he did very well. I thought that Kathy had killed my father to secure his money, that at last, my father had an equal to Kathy. Perhaps Kathy was the abuser and my father the victim, and sweet karma had come to collect the long-needed debts. What really strengthens my theory is the fact that my cousin and I think alike. My cousin and I are like night and day, black and white, sun and moon. We are complete opposites. So the fact that we just think alike means hell has frozen over. Kathy finally gave me a box of things. I expected she didn't want anything. I'm still upset that she disappeared after that, with no explanation or answer. However, my father's family didn't like her very much, so she had no reason to stay. I don't champion that she passed away so quickly. If she was truly in mourning, she would have had to sort out a lot of things physically and mentally. However, sometimes I finish the quest, so I try to learn about her. Kathy was a crazy woman, and to be honest, the mystery of my father's illness and sudden death stilled my mind in those terrifying minutes of the night. Story: The Courage to Speak. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a close-knit family often gathered for Sunday dinners. Among the regular attendees was a young boy named Alex, who always seemed a bit withdrawn. Alex was 12 years old, and his cousins, Mike and Lily, often wondered why he rarely smiled and why his eyes held a sadness that no child should bear. One evening, during one of these family gatherings, Mike noticed a bruise on Alex's arm. When he asked about it, Alex shrugged it off, saying he had fallen off his bike. But Mike wasn't convinced. He had seen similar bruises on Alex before, each time with a different explanation. Mike decided to keep a closer eye on Alex. Over the next few weeks, he noticed more bruises and a growing fear in Alex's eyes whenever his father, Uncle Tom, was around. Tom was known to have a short temper, but the extent of his cruelty was something the family hadn't fully realized. One day, after school, Mike found Alex sitting alone in the backyard, staring blankly at the ground. Mike sat down next to him and gently asked, "Alex, what's really going on? You can trust me." Alex hesitated, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's my dad," he finally whispered. "He's always angry. He hits me for everything. I can't do anything right." Mike felt a surge of anger and sadness. He hugged Alex tightly. "You don't deserve this, Alex. We have to tell someone. This can't keep happening." Alex shook his head vigorously. "No, Mike. He'll hurt me even more if he finds out I told anyone. And he'll hurt Mom too." Mike felt a knot in his stomach. He knew he had to do something, but he also understood Alex's fear. He decided to talk to his own parents first, hoping they would know how to handle the situation. That evening, Mike approached his parents, John and Mary, and told them everything Alex had shared. They listened intently, their faces growing more concerned with each passing moment. "We need to help him," Mike insisted. "We can't just ignore this." John nodded. "You're right, Mike. We can't let this go on. We'll talk to Alex's mom, and if necessary, we'll involve the authorities. But we have to be careful." The next day, John and Mary invited Alex's mother, Aunt Lisa, over for coffee. As they talked, they gently broached the subject of Tom's temper and the possibility of abuse. Lisa initially denied it, but as tears filled her eyes, she finally admitted the truth. "He's been like this for years," Lisa confessed. "I thought I could manage it, that it would get better. But it's only gotten worse. I'm terrified for Alex, but I don't know how to leave. I don't know where to go." Mary took Lisa's hand. "You don't have to do this alone. There are shelters and organizations that can help. We will support you every step of the way." With John and Mary's help, Lisa contacted a local domestic violence shelter. They provided her with resources and a plan to leave safely. Lisa gathered the courage to take action, knowing she had the support of her extended family. One evening, while Tom was out, Lisa packed their essentials and left with Alex to the shelter. It was a difficult and emotional step, but she knew it was the right one. The shelter provided them with a safe place to stay, counseling, and legal assistance. Tom was furious when he found out, but the restraining order kept him at bay. Lisa filed for divorce and sought custody of Alex. The process was long and challenging, but with the support of her family and the shelter, she remained steadfast. Alex struggled with the trauma of his father's abuse, but with therapy and the loving support of his mother and cousins, he began to heal. He found solace in activities he enjoyed, like drawing and playing soccer. Slowly, his laughter returned, and the fear in his eyes faded. Years later, Alex stood before a group of children and parents at a community center, sharing his story. "I was afraid to speak up, but my cousin Mike helped me find the courage. No one deserves to live in fear. If you're being hurt, tell someone you trust. There is help and there is hope." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were facing similar struggles. Alex's journey from a life of fear to one of empowerment inspired others to seek help and break free from the chains of abuse. Alex and his family had come a long way, and their story was a powerful reminder of the importance of speaking out and supporting one another. In the end, the courage to speak had not only saved Alex but had also given him a platform to help others find their own voice. Story: I, 30M, hit my father, 51M, for a past mistake. I am from Peru, from a provincial city. When I was 18 years old, my cousin, who is the same age as mine, accused me of having raped her. She and I were very close since we were children, since we used to spend time together. Due to family problems, she began to have depression. It wasn't like before. Now all she did was scream, get angry, or even blame me because I didn't have the same problems as her. The truth is, I was trying to help her, but my own mental health was beginning to deteriorate, so I decided little by little to move away. Months passed and I had no contact with her until one day my father came to my house and called me. I went out to meet him and he received me with a slap in the face. It should be noted that my father had never hit me before. Who did that was my mother, and only for specific reasons. When I asked him about the reason behind the hit, he slapped me again and told me to get out of the house, that his brother, my cousin's father, had told him that my cousin said that I raped her and that's why she was so depressed. Apparently her dad realized that she was cutting herself, and to get out of it she just blamed me for everything. My cousin didn't press charges, obviously because there is no proof, but still my dad told me that my uncle wanted to beat me up. My dad was disappointed in me. He hit me again, called me an abuser, insulted me, and told me to get out of his house. My mom was always a submissive person with him, so she didn't say anything to him. I simply, with my lip bleeding, grabbed my most valuable things and left. Thank God I had my savings on my card from what I had worked for, and I was able to go to the capital by public transportation. Once in the capital, I managed to rent a small room. I had a bad time for the next few years. I had a couple or two for a few years and jumping from job to job to survive. When I was 20 years old, my partner at that time told me that I could work at the KFC where she worked as a delivery order receptionist. The part-time job paid well, and with the bonuses you could even earn double or triple my salary, so I worked there doing the best I could while studying a technical degree in administration. Years passed and I ended up becoming a supervisor and then manager of that store thanks to my technical degree in business administration. At the age of 25, I became a partner with a former university classmate with whom I still had contact. She is a lawyer, and the age of 27 we got married. It was a small wedding because both she and I are modest with expenses, and because I had no family to invite. We currently have a 1-year-old son whom I love with all my soul. It was after this that everything went to hell. Today in the middle of the afternoon there was a knock at my door. It was my parents. It had been more than a decade since I had seen them. I was frozen, but not with fear, but with anger. My dad asked me if he could come in. I told him no, so we talked in a nearby park. In short, they told me that my cousin had committed suicide and that in her letter she confessed the whole truth, that the person who actually abused her was her mother's brother, and that everything was orchestrated by him to be able to cover up and other things. The truth is, I was very indifferent. For me, whoever accuses of those crimes deserves to suffer them in flesh, so I didn't feel sorry for her. I told them kindly, and resisting my urge to yell at them, to go away and never contact me again, that they were dead to me. When I stood up from the bench to go home, my dad grabbed me by the shoulder. He told me that we have to keep talking. I told him no. He insisted. I told him no. He insisted again. So I turned around and instinctively gave him a hit. I don't know when my dad became so weak. Any Latino knows that countrymen are quite strong, but one hit was enough to break his nose. He stood stunned looking at me with his eyes open and his nose bleeding, and my mom was covering her mouth, for some reason that I don't explain. My next reaction was to throw myself at him. It wasn't difficult to knock him to the ground, and I continued hitting him. When he started to cover his face, I started hitting his head or forehead. I'll not lie, it felt liberating. I felt like I was crying while I hit him, and I continued until my right hand was hurting. My mother stood still. For some reason she didn't do anything, she just stood there watching and crying. By that time it was already night, and in our area it was difficult to find people on the street, even less so considering that today there is a soccer game. My mom helped my dad and took a taxi. She didn't say anything to me, she didn't scream, she just cried, and as soon as she grabbed my dad she ran away. I'm not lying. If she had tried to intervene, maybe she would have gotten the same treatment. A few hours later my mother writes to me on my cell phone. Apparently they contacted a friend from university, I still have my social networks active, who told them where I lived, saying that my father needs a septum reconstruction because it was perforated, in dental reconstruction for having 4 broken teeth. Everything was going to cost the equivalent of $4,000, which is a lot of money here. Not a fortune, but it's a lot. I have already been clear with her, I am not going to put in a single cent. For my sake she and my dad could end up just like my cousin. I don't care. She has been calling me, asking for forgiveness for everything, that she wants to come back into my life, that she was afraid and that she should have protected me or at least believed me. According to her my dad felt the same, and according to him he deserves every hit I gave him. I guess we agree on that. I told my wife everything. She already knew what happened in the past with my parents. She just told me that she understood, that, according to what I told her, my father died when he kicked me out of his house, so who did I hit was just a stranger with his face. I found her comparison funny and I agreed with her. She told me that if they tried legal measures we would simply say that it was in self-defense. A law was recently passed in which lethal force can even be used when it's about self-defense, so if something happens to him we can rely on that. Right now I'm glad I have a lawyer wife. I can't help but feel more liberated after this. My parents aren't poor, so I know they'll get the money for the operation. I hope they just aren't idiots enough to come back to my house. This is my home now, and if I have to beat them both to get the hell out of my life, I will. At the end of the day, they are the ones who started all this. I was just defending myself. I still feel a little euphoric and happy. The truth is, I am a little happy that they are suffering. They deserve it. I am happy with my life and my family, and I would protect them at any cost. That includes my parents. I needed to get this off my chest somehow, so I'm writing this to release it. Somehow telling it all has made me feel better. Story: A Brother's Silent Cry. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived 2 brothers, Adam and Jake. Adam, the older of the 2, was 14, while Jake was 10. They lived with their mother, Laura, and their stepfather, Paul, in a modest house at the end of a quiet street. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family, but behind closed doors, a dark secret loomed. Paul, who had once seemed charming and kind, showed a different side after marrying Laura. His anger was unpredictable, and his temper often flared without warning. Unfortunately, Jake bore the brunt of Paul's rage. Adam often watched helplessly as Paul berated and sometimes hit Jake for the smallest infractions: spilled milk, a toy left out, or a simple mistake on homework. Jake, a quiet and gentle boy, would try to shrink into the background, but nothing seemed to protect him from Paul's wrath. One evening, while Adam was doing his homework, he heard a loud crash followed by Jake's cries. His heart pounded as he ran to the living room. There, he saw Paul standing over Jake, who was curled up on the floor, trying to shield himself. Without thinking, Adam stepped between them, facing his stepfather with a defiance he didn't know he possessed. "Leave him alone," Adam shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. Paul glared at Adam, his eyes filled with fury. "You think you can tell me what to do, boy? Stay out of this." But Adam didn't move. He stood his ground, trying to protect his brother. Paul raised his hand, but just then, Laura entered the room. She saw the scene and rushed to Adam's side, placing herself between her sons and Paul. "That's enough, Paul. Laura yelled, her voice steady and resolute. You need to leave. Now. Paul's face contorted with rage, but he didn't argue. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent except for Jake's sobs. Laura knelt beside him, holding him close and whispering words of comfort. Over the next few days, Laura took action. She filed a restraining order against Paul and sought help from a local domestic violence support group. She realized that she had to protect her children and herself from the man she once thought she knew. Laura and the boys moved into a shelter temporarily, where they received counseling and support. Adam was grateful for the change but still worried about Jake, who had become even quieter and more withdrawn. One day, a counselor named Mrs. Thompson sat with Adam and Jake for a session. She encouraged Jake to express his feelings, but he remained silent. Adam, feeling his brother's pain, gently held his hand. It's okay, Jake, Adam said softly. You're safe now. We're both safe. Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he finally spoke. I was so scared, Adam. I thought it would never end. Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. It's natural to feel scared, Jake. But you're very brave, both of you. Healing takes time, but you're not alone. We're here to help you. With time, patience, and support, Jake slowly began to heal. He started to open up about his experiences and began to regain his confidence. Adam, always by his side, encouraged him every step of the way. Laura found a new job, and they moved into a small but cozy apartment. Life was not without its challenges, but the atmosphere was filled with love and safety. Adam and Jake grew closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Years later, Adam looked back on those dark days with a sense of pride. They had overcome so much, and their family had emerged stronger. He realized that standing up to Paul had been the turning point, not just for Jake, but for all of them. Adam and Jake's story became an inspiration to others in their community, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and support in overcoming even the darkest times. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.